President Obama gives his view of the State of the Union, and Republicans have some ideas of their own. Welcome to Seib Wessel on WSJ.com. I'm Jerry Seib. The big news of the week in Washington was President Obama's State of the Union address, which set the table for his second term. But Republicans had some ideas and some disagreements with all of that. And to talk about that, I went earlier this week to Capitol Hill and sat down with Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers of Washington State. She's the chair of the Republican Conference and the highest-ranking Republican woman in Congress. I asked her at the outset whether she saw in the president's address any areas for bipartisan cooperation.
That's what I was hoping for. The beginning of the second term for the president. It's the beginning of the new Congress. And I felt like he missed an opportunity to really provide that leadership, to bring us together. I was especially hoping to hear some leadership, some plans on addressing the debt, the fiscal situation that this country faces and the impact that it's having on the economy, job creation, and those important growth strategy that we need moving forward. If there were one area where I do see I'm hopeful that we can move forward is on immigration reform. And coming out of the election, there's a renewed focus on immigration, recognizing that we need to fix what is a broken immigration system in America, and that also is important to economic growth. America has long been the country of immigrants, people that come here to pursue their dreams. This is the land of opportunity, and we want to continue to attract those folks that want to come here and be a part of taking advantage of the jobs.
Now, you mentioned jobs as something you wanted to hear about. The president talked about jobs a lot. By our count, he said the word jobs 43 times in the speech.
Really?
What was it about what he said about jobs that you didn't like?
Right. Well, the president failed to recognize the role that the debt, these record deficits are having on our economy, and to recognize that we're not going to have economic growth until we deal with the fiscal situation here in Washington, D.C., the out-of-control spending. And under this president, we've seen trillion-dollar deficits. That means we've added $1 trillion every year to the debt. It's at a record level, and it is impacting our economy. It is a burden because people cannot make those decisions, both individuals, families, businesses. There's a lot of uncertainty over what the future holds, because every dollar that the federal government borrows, it does have to be paid back. And so that's a burden on middle-class families moving forward. And so until the president and the Democrats recognize that there's a problem with out-of-control spending, our economy is going to continue to struggle.
Now, the president said in that speech that everything he was proposing, programs to increase manufacturing or to address climate change or to improve education, none of those would add a dime to the deficit because they would be paid for. Are you just not buying that?
Right, we've heard that before. We heard that back in 2009, his very first inaugural address, where he made the commitment that he would cut the deficit in half. And the exact opposite has happened. We've had record deficits, $1 trillion plus deficits every year. So unfortunately, the rhetoric doesn't match the results.
You know, one of the consequences of this impasse is that we're facing something we all call the sequester, which is across-the-board automatic spending cuts that kick in on March 1st unless there's an agreement to do something else to create the same amount of deficit reduction. Based on what you're saying, I don't sense a lot of common ground on an agreement that would prevent the sequester. Is the sequester now inevitable?
It's not inevitable. There is a deadline, and it's coming up on March 1st. This is the president's sequester. This was the president's idea. And again, last night, I was disappointed that I didn't hear a plan from the president as to how to address the sequester. I was hoping that we would hear him provide some leadership as it relates to the spending cuts, these really drastic spending cuts that are going to disproportionately impact our military readiness, national security moving forward. The Republicans have passed proposals twice now, both one that was 6 weeks ago, one that was 6 months ago, recognizing that this date was coming in an attempt to avoid this situation where there would be more uncertainty. We needed that leadership from the president last night. Now we still have 2 weeks. But we need the president, we need the Democrats to recognize that we have a spending problem.
Well, but the president said essentially the way to avoid the sequester is to come up with a deficit reduction package that includes some revenues. Is that still the sticking point that we can't get around here? They want revenues, you want spending cuts?
Well, the sequester, the budget right now is really, I think the sticking point is the fact that we do not hear the Democrats recognizing that we have a spending problem. Just on Sunday, Nancy Pelosi was saying, "Oh, it's not a deficit problem. It's not a spending problem. It's a deficit problem." Well, the way you get deficits is by spending too much. And then we heard Steny Hoyer, the minority whip, who said, "Well, it's not a spending problem. It's a pay-for problem." They're not recognizing the problem. And the first step in solving the problem of out-of-control spending, which most Americans recognize that the federal government is spending out of control, is to acknowledge that you have a problem.
So if that's the situation, would you at least say the sequester looks likely at this point?
Well, I wouldn't say never, and it's hard to say what will happen in the next 2 weeks. Congress often legislates based on crisis management.
So I've heard, yeah.
Not that it's an ideal way to run a country, and so I'm still hopeful.
Okay.
The Republicans want to come together. We believe we need to get to a balanced budget. We need to address the spending because that is how we're going to grow our economy and get Americans back to work.
Let me ask you about a couple of other ideas that are on the table as a result of the speech this week. One is raising the minimum wage. The president said $9 an hour, currently $7.25. Any interest in your party in doing that?
Right, that was a new issue that the president introduced in the State of the Union, and at a time when we have high unemployment and we have a record number of Americans that are looking for work, I think the president fails to recognize that by making it more expensive for employers to hire employees, that would actually work against our efforts to create jobs. We want jobs on every rung of the ladder, and we want to be creating those opportunities so that everyone can improve their job prospects. And that is not where you've been, it's where you're going. But it starts with sometimes those entry-level jobs.
And what about indexing the minimum wage to inflation so that it keeps up with inflation? An idea Mitt Romney talked about on the Republican side in the campaign. Is that a non-starter also?
Well, we'll see. The Republicans what we want more than anything is jobs. We want to get this economy growing again. That's going to have a positive impact across the board. And so those policies that are going to help create jobs, those are going to be at the top of our list. And we have concerns that issues related to increasing the minimum wage actually are going to make it harder to create jobs.
Now, one area that is now on the table as well that I think there might be a little more agreement on your side with the president is free trade. He did mention TPP, which is a trade agreement with East Asian countries, and the idea of a free trade agreement with Europe. Are those ideas that you think have some traction this year in this Washington?
Possibly. As much as we can create opportunities for companies here, located here in America, to create goods. I had the chance to sit down with Apple just this week and to hear them talk about the new products that they're still developing. It's really exciting to hear that. And we want them to continue to manufacture here in America and then sell their products all around the world. And when it comes to trade, that's the goal, to be opening up more markets for American companies, American manufacturers, create those jobs here and sell it around the world. I also come from an ag district, where we grow wheat and potatoes and apples. We export 90% of the wheat that's grown in Washington State. And so again, we want those jobs here. We want the safe food that is a result of the crops that are grown in states like Washington State.
And is there, on that manufacturing front, is there something the government could do, should do? I know you're not in favor of the kinds of industrial policies Democrats sometimes talk about, but is there a role for government to increase the role of manufacturing in the economy, one that you can see?
Well, we certainly want to attract more manufacturing in America, make it a competitive environment so that companies, manufacturing companies as well as everyone finds America the best place in the world to start that company, grow a company. And so it comes to issues like tax reform. I'm still hopeful that we may have an opportunity to simplify our tax code, make it fairer. It's very complicated. So tax reform would be a part of that, which makes a difference for individuals as well as businesses. The regulatory climate, it continues to be very difficult in America because of the regulatory climate. And we've seen a record number of regulations coming out of this administration. And we need smart regulations and making it all towards creating that climate where people know that America is the best place to do business. And we've been slipping in that index of economic freedom and competitiveness. America has. And that's not the direction I want us to be headed. I want us to be at the top.
Congresswoman, let me ask you this final question. You know, you referred earlier in our conversation to the governing in a crisis of atmosphere that's been kind of the norm the last couple of years around here. One of the things that people worry about, viewers will worry about now, is whether there's a possibility of another debt ceiling crisis or of a shutdown of the government later this spring because of an inability to agree on budget questions. Should they be worried about a debt ceiling crisis or a shutdown of the government?
What Americans and people should be worried about is the debt crisis, the fiscal crisis that this country is facing. And it is so important that Congress and the President be working together to address this out of control spending, address the record debt that is a damper on our economy, threatens our national security. Admiral Mullen, a couple of years ago, when he was asked, when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he's asked, what is the #1 security threat that faces America? And your mind goes in all different directions. And he says, it's the debt. Yeah. So I'm very concerned as a country that we cannot continue down this path. So when it comes to the budget, when it comes to raising the debt ceiling, we need to be enacting reforms and making the tough decisions, setting priorities within the federal government for spending so that we get us on a path to actually start balancing budgets and paying off that debt and get our economy growing again.
Well, Congresswoman Rodgers, it may be a year of decision on some of those things. I appreciate you taking some time to talk about it. Hope we can do it again as the weeks ahead unfold.
Thank you.